Okay, cool. Let's start. So, hi everyone. My name is Tomasz, and I'm going to talk to you about open source and how to maintain it and not lose your sanity. First of all, who am I? So I work at VirtusLab as a senior software developer, and I previously worked still at VirtusLab as a contributor for Scala Center. If you don't know Scala Center, it's a not-for-profit organization dealing with anything related to the Scala programming language. And that was until last year. This year we have dedicated, so we started last year, we have dedicated teams for two of our main open source projects, which is Scala CLI and Metals. Scala CLI was started by us. Metals is a project we contribute heavily to. I'll explain a bit what it is in a second. And what is VirtusLab? We're a software house. We deal with all those different technologies, especially Java and Scala, some front-end, some Python, some data science. And recently we merged into one big family with a software mill, whose booth you can see in the main hall. And you can drop them, visit, and they will ask you some questions about everything related to developing software. And why am I talking about open source? I worked on multiple open source projects. One of them I mentioned before, it is Metals. It's a language server for Scala programming language. I also work on a couple of other smaller projects. One is MDoc. It's a snippet compiler in Markdown, so you can compile your Scala code and see if it's actually working. So this brings you the type check documentation that you know the examples are always correct. I work on Scala Meta. It's a very tooling-related project that has a Scala version agnostic parser and this kind of database for languages. This is SemanticDB that stores information about, we have plugins for both Java and Scala, and stores information about all the types and symbols that are in the source file. I also worked a bit with the Scala free compiler and also on the Blue build server, which is something that can compile your code. It's a single server on your machine, and it can compile different projects, so it's more efficient way to have multiple projects being compiled on one machine. Okay, so mostly I've been dealing with open source tooling. And open source tooling, people love to complain about it. And rightly so, because it's a very complicated piece, almost always a very complicated piece of software. And it's hard to get it right, hard to nail it, and your only clients are other developers, so it's less, you don't get all the nice UX designers a lot of the time, and you sometimes do the project on a small scale, so it's very hard to do. And I had my share of complaints. I dealt with multiple complaints, people being unhappy about things. So, and I'm still sane, so that's a good promise for the next minutes of the talk. So open source. Who knows what's open source? Any hands? Nobody knows what's open source? Yes, thank you. Okay. So who has contributed to an open source project? Any hands? Yes, so there's people. Any maintainers? Okay, so not many people, but so if you want to start, if there's anybody wanting to start an open source project, I have some advice that might help you. Okay, why can it be problematic to have an open source project? This might not seem like a problem, but in the long run it is. So an open source project is a labor of love. It is something that you enjoy working on, especially at the start. And because of that, it might take over some of your free time. And even if you get paid for that, like me, I still use a bit of my free time to work on other open source projects. So it all takes that free time. And in order for you to keep on working on that project needs to stay enjoyable for you. And it's hard when you're met with unreasonable demands from users. They want this feature, they want this fixed right away. They might be toxic users. We've had a situation where somebody actually put in a PR in tests of a formatter. He put some Trump slogans or MAGA slogans. I'm not very familiar which ones they are, but we asked them to not do that because it's really, I mean, it's racist. So we don't want that in our code base, which is obvious. And we had to ban that user. And because of all those demands and toxic users, you can be led to a burnout, and burnout can lead to multiple psychological problems, depression. Like I've heard people dealing with a lot of problems after dealing with an open source project for a long while. Why does it matter? If you get led to that burnout, if you get the joy removed from your project, you lose the thing that made you want to work on open source. The thing that you wanted to do, it no longer is fun for you. So this is actually terrible. But when thinking about open source project, first of all, you have to realize that if you maintain it, it's your space and you can set the rules, which is very important. You can set any rules that you want. First of all, you usually want to have some kind of code of conduct. You can set it for your organization, so then you don't have to set it up every time you create a new project. You can add some additional guidelines so that people are aware that maybe some things are different in your project. Maybe you want, for example, to have very positive language. I'll get back to that. But those rules, you are the judge whether somebody actually follows those rules. And you can always be the last like you choose what you want to do in order to make it still be a safe space for your free time or for your free time software activity, so to say. One thing that I found that is very helpful is try to keep everything positive, like to make users, make the contributors to focus on technical aspects and try to keep the language positive, because it's very easy to misconstrue any comments from anybody if they sound a bit trollish, or maybe you think that they're trying to demand something, but they may be actually not. So it's very important to keep the language be something that cannot be understood in two different ways. It needs to be one way, it's positive, and you just want to talk about those technical aspects with that person. So, and you don't want to trash any other projects, you don't want to trash anything, anybody else. Here's an example of such a conversation on one of our repositories. So actually, this is not me, this is Rikito, one of my colleagues, and he responded, I think, really well to an issue request that we weren't able to work on. And the person was like, oh, okay, fine. And we didn't have any issues, no conversation about, like, he could have responded in a very different way. He could have said, like, don't open this useless feature request. This should be, like, you can do it very wrongly. And what you need to do is always keep it to the positives or technical aspects, ideally positive technical aspects. And this keeps the toxicity out, and you can ban users if they actually continuously keep being negative or keep talking about things that are irrelevant to the current discussion. You can ban them. You can ask other people for some opinions. So if they feel, because sometimes you might be angry at that person and you feel like maybe I'm wrong, maybe I shouldn't ban that person. You can ask somebody else, and if they agree, you can just ban them. The only thing I would recommend in those situations is have a way back for that person, because we want people to be rehabilitated, not just banned forever. And that user that posted all those MAGA sentences in unit tests actually then after a while send an email, I'm sorry, I'll just write normal tests without any double meaning. And we unbanned him, and he never wrote anything like that again in any of our organization's repositories. So you should always have a way for those people to come back in. Okay, another thing that I found very useful is trying to make it as easy as possible for users to contribute information to solving any of their problems. So you try to, in your project, you should try to involve as much information about what happened if there was a bug, that if they put it into an issue, you will know, this has happened. Oh, this situation, I have to fix it. You can use some templates, for example, in Metos, so the LSP server. We have an additional command that can pre-fill a template on GitHub with all the basic information. That will be in the next slide. But the last thing I wanted to mention here is that you can also, for any tools you have, you can use some opt-in automated reporting, things like Sentry. We haven't used that yet in any of our repositories, but I feel that it could be a really nice solution to people not willing to go to issues, opening those issues, because that takes time and people might not have that time. This is what we generate. So if you open an issue from within our VS Code extension, you get information about the operating system, about the Java version, Visual Studio Code version, all the stuff that basic stuff that we need, so that people don't need to put it in manually. So it's easier for them to open those issues. And also another thing is that you should have a place for discussions. So not everything needs to turn into an issue. Sometimes you can help out the user via Discord. Discourse, like a minimum, I feel like you should have some kind of discussions on GitHub, because this is a place that this isn't that much of a burden on you. If somebody just discusses something, it's nothing you need to solve. It can be other people get involved there easier. So this can turn later on into an issue, but it's not really necessary that you solve that discussion. I really like that we have a Discord channel, a server. It helps us to discuss some matters internally also, and a lot of people just pop in, ask a question, get it responded, and that's like 2 minutes of our response time, and don't waste it on opening issue without being responsive, because opening issue, it takes time for them to then respond if you ask them questions. Okay, and very important thing about if somebody finally opens up an issue is that you can close any issues that you don't want to work on. So you don't have to solve everything. You don't have to please every user there is. You can just close anything that you don't want. You can have we have a feature request repository. We just put everything outside where people can vote on the feature requests, and we might sometimes work on them if we want, if we see a lot of people's interest, but it doesn't pollute the main repository, and it isn't something that feels like it's urgent for us to fix it. You can triage the issues via looking if it's something that you need to solve, like it's influencing a lot of users, or maybe it's a small issue that person that reported it can actually fix themselves. So I usually respond to anything that isn't necessarily needed to be fixed right away. I respond where to fix it, some additional information, try to add it. So in a couple of situations, it actually helped for that purpose, that people fix that problem themselves. And it's still very important to keep responding in a positive manner to every issue and every discussion. It keeps the space healthy for you, not only for the user. It's mostly for you, because this needs to be a healthy space for you. And when you want to expand the project, or you ask people to fix the issues, you can attract contributors by making it as easy as possible to contribute. So you can have some architecture overview, which has all the main classes and information where things related to a particular feature sit. You should for sure document standard workflows, so any kind of testing, building it locally, any standard workflow that you can think of, you should have a way for it so that it's easy for people to just run it for themselves. And last but really not least, it should be very easy for other maintainers to release that project. So for example, in most our repositories, you have to just push a tag to release anything. This makes sure that not everything is blocked on you. So if you go to vacation and there's an urgent release, somebody else can do it and you can just enjoy your vacation. So it helped numerous times for us that anybody actually from the maintainers could release. And all of that I mentioned creates this scaffolding that makes the burden of maintaining an open source project much, much lesser. So your daily burden gets decreased, you don't get to burn out so quickly, and that lets the project thrive. It's not necessary that every project uses every possible advice I gave here. Smaller projects might have might not need everything, but this is something that I feel worked for us, and it helped to create a healthy atmosphere in most of our projects. But the most important thing when working with open source is to take care of your mental health. You have to be conscious that everything that you do, it actually impacts your mental health and how your daily life. So it's very important, because I heard really bad stories about what happened to numerous open source maintainers, and you really don't want that. And one of those maintainers actually made a YouTube, no, it's not, it was a talk on GeeCON in 2019. And it is a very morbid title, When Your Happy Dreams Are About Dying, which might kind of tell you that it is a really tough topic and it's very difficult conversation maintaining an open source project. And this is this presentation. So if you want to take a look again at the very short presentation I have here, that's the second QR code. So, okay. You can reach me on any social media, like Twitter, Mastodon. You can send me an email to Virtus Lab if you need help, for example, some advice. I'm happy to help out. But other than that, I'll take any questions. So I'll take a quick look if there's any questions. Okay. I would like to participate in some kind of an open source project. What should I do? Create something myself or find an existing one? So if you want to work on something, it's usually best to find a problem that you have in your daily life as a developer, or not necessarily, and have that project solve that issue that you have, because you're much more motivated to work on it if it helps you. If it's something that you do daily. So you can start a totally new project, that's totally fine, but it needs to be something that will keep you motivated. So if you solve it, that brings you some additional advantage, some positive feedback. When there are issues that happen on different hardware systems, how would you tackle them? So we usually have a CI that runs every possible system that we support. But when an issue happens that I'm not able to reproduce on CI, I usually I have at least two machines. I have a Linux box and a Windows box, so I am able to fix those. And a lot of my colleagues have Mac OS, so they usually help me out and check it there. If I can't find a machine, I usually try to reproduce it again on CI. So it sometimes, after a longer while, it might be possible to reproduce that, but it's very tough because usually the iterations are much longer. You need to run the CI, go back, run the CI, go back, and it takes a very long time. Okay. Last question is it worth to contribute to open source project? If yes, then why? What is the most inspiring in creating an open source project? So, creating open source. So, I think it's worth it because like it's your personal marketing for once. People can see that you participate in open source. That's an additional bonus when you're looking for a job for sure. Additionally, you can go to conferences because you have something that you can talk about. You don't have to have everybody in the audience sign an NDA and then only talk about it. So this is something really nice to actually go to conferences. And it's really nice when you hear people actually comment like, thank you for doing that. Like, it's small things, like people just doing positive comments. And it actually really is nice, and it feels very satisfying. So it's very small things, but it really is satisfying. The last thing I would say is fixing your own problems. This is the most satisfying thing because then I can use my tool to do the things that I want. And then if something doesn't work, just fix it and it's working, and my flow is much better this way. Okay, thank you very much. I am happy everybody. I had so many questions, and if you have any other questions, you can find me around. Thank you.